General Hospital spoilers tease that Molly stands frozen, the pieces of evidence in her hand trembling slightly from the intense shock. From the moment she began piecing together the fragmented details surrounding Ric's accident, a vague sense of unease had been smoldering inside her. But now, as the truth came together into a clear and horrifying story, Molly could no longer deny it. Everything had gone far beyond what she had ever feared. There was no longer any doubt. Ric and Ava had deliberately staged the accident. It was no longer an accident, no longer a mistake, but a coldly calculated plan to blackmail Sunny and drive Christina into the dark corner. By intentionally causing the accident, Ric and Ava had fabricated a tragic story, exploiting the emotions, loyalty, and fleeting weakness of those around them to manipulate, threaten, and demand what they wanted. Memories flashed through Molly's mind like a patchwork film. But now everything was clear under the cold, merciless light of the truth. She recalled Ric's look in the hospital that day, full of pain, but also holding something strangely unsettling that she hadn't been able to explain at the time. She remembered Ava, who had firmly denied any involvement, yet had moments where her eyes darted away, her face wearing an oddly embarrassed expression. Every small detail, every word, every action began to piece together into a dark and terrifying picture. The shock pushed Molly into a state of paralysis for a moment. She couldn't believe that Ric, her father, the man who had once comforted her in her darkest days, the one who had promised to always protect her from harm, could be the mastermind behind such a cruel plot. And Ava, with her glamorous appearance, was ready to push everyone into the abyss just to satisfy her dark ambitions. Molly felt as though the floor beneath her feet was crumbling into pieces. The trust she had placed in her family, in her loved ones, was now shattered beyond repair. She didn't know who to turn to, didn't know if she could trust anyone anymore. But the shock quickly gave way to an overwhelming fury. Molly clenched her fists, her eyes blazing with determination. She understood that she could not just sit back and watch everything be twisted like this. If Ric and Ava thought they could toy with lives, with loyalty, and family love like pawns on a power game, they were wrong. Molly decided she would expose everything. She would bring the truth to light, even if it meant facing the most brutal battles. Even if she had to go up against her own family. Even if she had to face rejection and isolation from those who had once been closest to her, Molly would not back down. Because the truth was worth more than any false sense of security. But she also knew that she had to act carefully. Ric and Ava were dangerous opponents, not easy to defeat. She couldn't rush into things. She needed to gather more evidence. Make sure that when the time came, she would strike at their weakest point, leaving them no chance to turn the tables. Molly began to plan in her mind. She would find ways to gather testimony from witnesses, investigate the technical details of the accident, and find ways to approach Ava without revealing her intentions. She would also reach out to Jason, the only one cold-blooded, smart, and loyal enough to help her in the upcoming merciless battle. And as Molly prepared for this war, she realized something. This was not just a battle for Christina, for Sunny, or for the truth. This was a fight to save her own soul. To prove that she would not let herself become a part of the dark world that Ric and Ava were trying to impose on her. In the growing darkness, Molly stood tall, her eyes shining with unwavering determination. She knew the road ahead would be full of pain and betrayal. But she also knew that she had no choice but to move forward. The truth was demanding that she fight, and this time, she would fight to the end. One of the new stories that is quietly unfolding in the shadows of the Davis family is Alexis silently bearing it all, ready to sacrifice herself to protect Christina from total destruction. Even though the truth was beginning to surface, even though the irreversible mistakes were being laid bare, Alexis remained resolute. In her heart as a mother, there was only one thing that mattered. Protecting her daughter, at any cost, by any means necessary, even if it meant destroying her own life. When evidence about Christina cutting Ric's car brakes became clearer, and Molly grew furious, demanding to expose everything, Alexis made an irreversible decision: she would take the fall. Alexis would say that she was responsible, that for a moment of lost control, she had caused it all. Alexis knew that doing so meant giving up everything she had built in her life, her reputation, career, credibility, even her freedom. But to her, all of that meant nothing compared to watching Christina be destroyed by her own naive mistakes. However, as Alexis prepared to sacrifice it all, a new obsession began to silently spread, casting a dark shadow over the entire story. For in the moment Alexis was ready to take the blame, the entire structure of trust in the Davis family began to tremble. Every member was pushed into moral dilemmas, where the lines between right and wrong, between love and destruction, became so blurred that no one could be certain what the right choice was. And in the chaos, Molly, who had once sworn to sever all ties with Alexis and Christina, suddenly felt a powerful awakening within herself. Despite the betrayal, despite her anger, deep down in her heart, Molly could not sit idly by and watch her mother suffer alone. Somehow, the memories of the love, the quiet sacrifices Alexis had made for her children over the years began to resurface in Molly's mind, like waves crashing over her hatred and pain. With all the courage and loyalty she had left, Molly decided she would do whatever it took to protect Alexis. Despite everything that had happened, despite the promises of severing ties, Molly knew she could not let her mother bear the consequences for someone else's mistakes. Even though Alexis had chosen Christina over her, even though she had lied, even though she had kept secrets, the bond of motherhood, of family, was deeper than any wound. This decision did not come easily. Molly would have to face her own anger, the betrayal she had felt. She would have to swallow her pain, push aside the hurt to step into a new battle, not one of punishment, but one to save what was left of her family. Molly began to secretly plan. She would investigate to find a way to break Ric and Ava's blackmail scheme, would find evidence to clear Christina's name without Alexis having to sacrifice herself. She would gather witnesses, exploit the holes in Ric and Ava's story, and if necessary, she would face them all head-on, bearing all the pressure for her mother. In Molly's heart now, there was no room for hesitation. She knew that if she lost Alexis this time, if she allowed Alexis to destroy herself in silence, she would never forgive herself. This was not just a battle to protect the mother who had made mistakes, it was a battle to reclaim the soul of the Davis family, to prove that even in the face of disaster, even with cracks in their foundation, love and forgiveness could still save what seemed lost forever. And so, Molly, with eyes alight with determination, stepped into this new battle. A battle that was not simple, not clean, not easy, but the only one she knew she had to fight, for Alexis, for Christina, and for herself. Molly never thought that one day she would have to be ruthless with the man who was once known as her father. But when the truth was exposed, when the dark schemes were revealed, Molly understood that she had no choice but to confront it. The love that once existed now only remained as cold fury, a deep cut that could never be healed in her soul. Though Molly's heart had not yet healed from Christina's mistakes, she knew that Alexis could not take the fall for everyone. Deep inside Molly, despite all the pain, the image of the mother who sacrificed for her children was too great for her to ignore. And so, in a moment of no hesitation, Molly decided to push aside all personal anger, to focus all her remaining strength to save Alexis, to save the family that was on the verge of falling apart. It didn't stop at just protecting. Molly chose to act. She understood the root of all the tragedy, and she knew that to cut off the threats surrounding her family, she had to attack at the heart of the lies, Ric. The man she had once called father was now only a symbol of the deepest betrayal. With persistence and intelligence, Molly silently gathered evidence, each piece of a message, each audio recording, each shady financial trace, small fragments that slowly came together into a complete picture of the dirty plot that Ric and Ava had orchestrated to blackmail Sonny and push Christina into the depths of despair. She would not allow herself to back down from any detail, because she knew that even the smallest mistake could cause everything she had worked for to fall apart. When everything was ready, Molly chose the right moment to expose the truth. She did not act alone, but formed an alliance with those she knew would not compromise with evil: Jason, Carly, the tough and powerful characters in the chaotic world she was now forced to enter. All the evidence was laid out, clear, cold, leaving no room for Ric or Ava to deny. The truth exploded like a bomb in the heart of Port Charles. Ava, with undeniable charges, was quickly arrested, facing a future with no way out behind prison bars. All the blackmail schemes, all the fabricated plots were exposed without mercy. Ava's days of freedom and arrogance were officially over, giving way to a long and endless period of atonement. As for Ric, although he wasn't arrested immediately, every mask of decency he had worn was torn off in front of everyone. No one believed his excuses anymore. No one believed the image of the ideal father Ric had once tried to present. Molly looked at him with cold eyes, with no trace of affection left. As if she had severed the father-daughter bond with one decisive slash in her heart. She didn't need to curse or speak venomous words, it was her resolute silence that sentenced Ric. A sentence harsher than any accusation. Alexis, who had been prepared to sacrifice everything to save her daughter, now stood beside Molly, witnessing the whole battle come to an end in a well-deserved victory. The silent tears falling from Alexis' face were not the tears of a defeated person, but the tears of pride and gratitude. Realizing that her daughter had grown strong, brave, and resilient beyond anything she had hoped. The Davis family, though scarred deeply after the storm, at least had the chance to rise from the rubble, thanks to Molly. Ava was behind bars, Ric was ostracized by society, and Alexis was cleared, keeping the freedom and dignity she deserved. Molly knew that the wounds would not disappear overnight. The relationship between her and Christina still had many cracks, many pains that could not be healed immediately. But she also knew that by doing the right thing, by standing up for the truth and for her family, she had laid a solid foundation for a rebirth. In a world once full of darkness, Molly had lit a new flame, a flame of justice, courage, and hope. As new developments continue to unfold in Port Charles, a new storm is quietly brewing, pushing the Davis family into an even more dangerous spiral than before. Ava, exposed to justice, now fiercely fights back, determined to use every last trick to preserve her freedom. In a move no one could have predicted, Ava has hired Ric to represent her in the courtroom. The appearance of Ric, once considered family, now standing beside Ava, mortal enemy of the Davis family, was like a sharp blade stabbing deep into Molly's heart. Molly, who had once painfully declared she was cutting ties with Ric, now felt even more enraged as she witnessed him not only betray his own blood, but willingly become the protector of Ava's crimes. Ric siding with Ava in this legal battle was not just a personal betrayal, but a complete violation of everything Molly had once believed in. With every step Ric took toward Ava, Molly felt her heart grow colder, and her determination to destroy the entire web of lies became even sharper. Meanwhile, the blackmail of Sonny and Alexis, orchestrated by Ava, was slowly revealing even darker layers. Ava had cleverly exploited Alexis's weaknesses, using Christina as a pawn to trap Alexis in an impossible situation. Molly could not stand by and accept this. She could not sit still while her mother, who had sacrificed so much, was cornered by those unworthy of her. The anger within Molly was no longer a fleeting outburst, but had turned into cold determination, a steel will forged through immeasurable loss. However, just as Molly was preparing to launch a full-scale attack, another event unfolded. Christina, in a moment of confronting the truth and her conscience, confessed to all her wrongdoings. She admitted that she was the one who cut the brakes on the car, in a moment of recklessness, in a blind rage. This confession was a heavy blow to both Alexis and Molly, throwing everything they had thought was under control into chaos once again. Alexis, who had been ready to take the fall for Christina, now faced the harsh reality that she could not continue to protect her daughter by sacrificing herself. And Molly, though heartbroken and disappointed, understood that this was no longer the time for punishment. It was time to act intelligently and humanely, to save Christina without pushing her down an irreversible path. Thus, in a pivotal decision, Alexis and Molly came together to plan a way to adjust the situation. Instead of allowing Christina to face prison, which they both knew would destroy her entirely, they decided she would be transferred to Shadybrook, a psychiatric facility for those needing emotional rehabilitation and behavioral control. It was not an easy forgiveness. It was a choice made after much painful and severe consideration. Both Alexis and Molly understood that without the opportunity for healing, Christina would never be able to find herself again. At Shady Brook, Christina would have to face her actions, confront her bare self, with no place to hide. But at the same time, she would have a real chance to change. To atone for her mistakes not just with words, but with meaningful actions. Once the agreement was made, Molly felt a heavy burden lifted from her shoulders. Though the fight wasn't over. And though Ava and Ric were still struggling to find a way out, Molly knew that at least her family had a chance for redemption. Not through more bloodshed, not by destroying each other, but by facing the truth with the utmost courage. This story was not just about schemes, betrayals, or plans for revenge. It was also about growth. About the difficult choices one must make when standing at the crossroads of the darkest paths. Molly had learned that true love is not about unconditional forgiveness. Nor is it about letting go and turning a blind eye. It is about knowing when to fight, and when to reach out and save those you love from themselves. In the days that followed, as Christina began her treatment at Shady Brook, as Ava faced harsh sentencing in court, and as Ric descended into the contempt of the entire town, Molly knew a new chapter was beginning for her family, a chapter of rebuilding from the wreckage, of the faintest light emerging after a long and cold storm. And this time, Molly would be the one to lead that journey, with an unwavering resolve, with love mixed with sharp reason, and with a steadfast belief that no matter how cruel the past had been, the future was still worth fighting for. As the carefully constructed schemes of Ric were peeled away layer by layer before justice, the meticulous plan he had built in the shadows finally crumbled. With no chance to turn the tide, no safe escape routes left, Ric was forced to watch his power-driven dreams turn to dust. The bitter defeat not only tarnished Ric's name throughout Port Charles but also dealt a fatal blow to his last, fragile attempts to preserve whatever little dignity he had left. In this context, a new kind of imposition began to form, imposition from isolation, from the disdain of society, and from the consequences Ric could no longer deny or escape. Continuous losses were driving him into a corner, revealing the insane shifts in Ric's psychology. No longer the wise, calm man who meticulously calculated each step, Ric now spiraled into impulsive, desperate decisions. And in the midst of this psychological storm, Ric suddenly focused his attention on Molly, the daughter he had once loved with all his heart. The daughter who now had completely severed their blood connection. One of Ric's most drastic shifts in thinking was his desire to mend his father-daughter relationship with Molly. He began to take action. He tried every possible way to reach out to Molly, from clumsy apologies to attempts to arrange emotional meetings. Ric hoped that by invoking old memories, by recalling the peaceful days when Molly was a child, he could bring her back and regain the love he had destroyed with his own hands. However, things were not as simple as Ric had imagined. Because even in what seemed like a gesture born of love, Ric could not shed the controlling nature that had been ingrained in him. His attempts at reconciliation quickly morphed into hidden agendas. Ric didn't just want Molly's forgiveness, he wanted to control her, to direct her life in the way he deemed right. His initial advice and guidance were merely a facade for a deeper desire, to turn Molly into the final pawn he could use to redeem his lost position. And so, another crazy shift began to take form. Molly, with her sharp intuition and unhealed wounds, quickly recognized what was happening. She could sense the subtle infiltration in every word and every sweet gesture Ric attempted to disguise. Beneath the fabricated calm, an eruption was brewing, a growing resistance inside Molly, making the already fractured relationship even more irreparable. Molly understood that Ric wasn't truly remorseful. He was only trying to save himself through her, using family love as a tool to satisfy his deep thirst for power. And once again, Molly was faced with a brutal choice: forgive to salvage a relationship that could no longer be salvaged, or decisively cut ties and end Ric's toxic influence in her life forever. This time, Molly would not hesitate. She decided to build solid barriers to stop Ric's every attempt to reach her. Molly no longer exploded with rage as before, but with the calmness of someone who had matured through pain. She didn't need to shout or shed tears to prove her strength. It was her resolute silence, her uncompromising rejection, that became the harshest sentence for Ric. In Molly's eyes, Ric was no longer the failed father who needed forgiveness, but a dark part of the past she had to cast aside to save herself. She didn't hate him, but she would not allow pity to soften her heart. Molly knew that true love could never exist in control and manipulation. Ric, in the absolute loneliness he had created for himself, finally had to face the harshest truth: he had lost Molly forever. Not because Molly was cruel, but because he had pushed her away with his actions, with one wrong decision after another, no apology ever able to erase it. This story didn't end with a forgiving hug, or with an emotional reunion in the soft sunlight. It ended in heavy silence, in Molly's determined footsteps walking away, and in Ric's empty gaze as he realized that sometimes the price of betrayal is eternal loneliness, beyond redemption.